still remember the exact moment my life changed. It wasn't when I got married or when we bought our first house. No, it was on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday evening when my husband of 8 years looked down at the coq au vin I'd spent 3 hours preparing and said maybe we should just order pizza. The silence that followed was deafening. "What's wrong with it?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm as I stared at the dish I'd been perfecting for weeks. David shrugged, poking at a piece of chicken with his fork. "It's fine, Maya. Just a bit amateur. The sauce is separated and the chicken's dry." He offered what he probably thought was a sympathetic smile. "Not everyone can cook. It's no big deal." No big deal. As if I hadn't spent years teaching myself French cooking techniques. As if I hadn't converted our spare bedroom into a pantry for specialty ingredients. As if cooking wasn't the one thing that had kept me sane during the darkest period of my life. "You're right," I said, setting down my fork. "Let's order pizza." Later that night, after David had fallen asleep, I sat at our kitchen island staring at my collection of cookbooks. The marginal notes, the dog-eared pages, the sauce stains on my favorite recipes. Physical evidence of my passion. Amateur? Perhaps, but not for lack of trying. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Leah. "How was the coq au vin? Did David love it?" I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Leah had been my taste tester for weeks as I perfected the recipe. "He suggested pizza instead," I wrote back. Her response was immediate. "What?" That dish was restaurant quality. Restaurant quality. The phrase echoed in my mind, triggering a memory from years ago. Before I met David, I had briefly considered culinary school after college, even toured a few campuses. But ultimately, I chose the practical path of corporate marketing. The next morning I woke before David and made a phone call I had been putting off for months. When he came downstairs, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a strangely peaceful feeling. "Morning," he mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. "No breakfast?" "Not today," he turned, finally noticing my expression. "Everything okay?" "I quit my job." Coffee sloshed over the edge of his mug. "You what?" "I called Marcus this morning and resigned, effective immediately. I have 3 months of vacation saved up, so that's my notice period." David set his mug down carefully as if handling explosives. "Maya, is this about last night? Look, I'm sorry about the chicken thing. I was tired and not thinking." "It's not about the chicken," I lied. "Not entirely. I've been unhappy at Meridian for a long time, you know that. But to quit without another job lined up, without even discussing it with me?" He ran a hand through his hair. "What's your plan exactly?" I took a deliberate sip of coffee. "I'm going to culinary school." His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally settled on condescending concern. "Honey, cooking is a great hobby, but turning it into a career at your age? The restaurant industry is brutal. The hours, the physical demands, the low pay. I'm aware of the challenges, and the cost of culinary school versus the return on investment. I'm using my inheritance from Mom and Dad." I interrupted. "It's my money, David, my decision." He leaned back, studying me as if seeing me for the first time. "You've really thought this through?" "Yes." "All because I didn't like one chicken dish?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, because when you dismissed my cooking as amateur, you dismissed years of passion and learning. And I realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life having my dreams treated as hobbies." David's reaction to my culinary school announcement was exactly what I expected. Initial shock, followed by patronizing support that thinly veiled his conviction that I'd fail. Over the next few weeks, he transitioned from, "Are you sure about this?" to, "Well, I guess you need to get it out of your system." Meanwhile, I methodically prepared for my new life. I organized my inheritance funds, researched housing near Auguste Culinary Institute, and most importantly, began practicing basic knife skills for hours each day. "You're really serious about this," Leah remarked, watching me execute a perfect brunoise on a carrot. We were in her kitchen, where I'd been spending more and more time as tension with David increased. More serious than I've been about anything in years. I gathered the precisely cut carrot pieces into a neat pile, I keep thinking about how alive I feel when I'm cooking. When did I stop prioritizing that feeling? When you married David? She muttered, then quickly added, sorry, that wasn't fair. But it was fair, and we both knew it. I had gradually surrendered pieces of myself during my marriage, rationalizing each concession as part of being a supportive wife. David's career always took precedence. My cooking was a cute hobby. Our social life revolved around his colleagues and preferences. Have you told him about your apartment yet? Leah asked. I shook my head. I'm waiting for the right moment. The right moment presented itself a week later when David announced he'd been invited to speak at a marketing conference in Chicago, the same weekend I was scheduled to move into my small studio apartment near Auguste. That's perfect timing, I said, setting down the dinner plates. I found a place near the school I can move in while you're away. His fork paused halfway to his mouth. A place? What are you talking about? An apartment for while I'm in culinary school. You're moving out? His voice held genuine confusion, as if the concept had never occurred to him. The school is an hour commute from here, and with the demanding schedule, it makes more sense to be closer. I kept my tone practical, matter of fact. It's just temporary. But we both recognized the lie. This wasn't temporary. This was the first step toward a separation we'd been silently building toward for months, possibly years. I see. David set down his fork. Were you planning to discuss this with me at any point? I'm discussing it now. After you've already secured the apartment, made the decision unilaterally? His voice took on the same condescending tone he'd used when I announced culinary school. Maya, this isn't how married people handle major life changes. You're right, I agreed, surprising him. Married people should support each other's dreams. They should notice when their partner is deeply unhappy in their career. They should taste the love in a meal their spouse spent weeks perfecting, not suggest ordering pizza. Silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken disappointments. Is this your way of asking for a divorce? He finally asked. No, it's my way of trying to find myself again. I looked at him directly, but I can't guarantee who I'll be when I do. The first day at Auguste Culinary Institute was a blur of sharp knives burning oil and the intoxicating scent of butter melting in cast iron. The air in the kitchens vibrated with intensity, every student moving with purpose, every instructor watching with an eagle eye. It was nothing like cooking at home. It was war, and I was already behind enemy lines. I quickly learned that passion alone wouldn't be enough to survive here. My knife skills were adequate but nowhere near as precise as my peers who had worked in professional kitchens. My sauces, which I once considered impressive, were scoffed at for lacking depth. Every critique from Chef Moreau, our lead instructor, was a brutal lesson in humility. You hesitate too much, he observed during my first attempt at plating. Food does not wait for confidence. You must move like you mean it. I nodded, swallowing. The sting of his words. Hesitation had been my enemy long before I ever set foot in this kitchen. Days bled into nights, and exhaustion became my new reality. I had always thought of cooking as an art, a love language, but here it was also survival. The weak were exposed quickly, and I refused to be among them. Every night I practiced. I diced onions until my fingers throbbed. I whisked hollandaise until my arm burned. I tasted, adjusted, and tasted again until I could identify the precise moment when a dish transformed from passable to extraordinary. My classmates were a mix of dreamers and realists. Some had worked under Michelin-starred chefs. Others, like me, had left stable careers to chase something uncertain. My closest ally became Sophia, a former architect who had traded blueprints for pastries. She was effortlessly graceful in the EEI kitchen, her hands moving like a sculptor's while I relied on grit and stubbornness. Your flavors are bold, she remarked one night as we tested our sauces in the dorm kitchen. Not afraid to take risks. That's rare. I wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. David and I spoke less and less as the weeks passed. Our conversations became formalities, reduced to short text exchanges. How's school? Busy, but good. Hope you're doing okay, You too. I knew what we were doing, delaying the inevitable, avoiding the conversation that would force us to acknowledge that I was no longer the woman he married, and he had no interest in the woman I was becoming. Then came the moment that changed everything. Halfway through the semester, we were given our first individual challenge. Recreate a classic French dish with our own unique twist. It was a test of skill, creativity, and confidence. I knew exactly what I wanted to make. Coq au vin, the dish that had started this journey, the dish David had dismissed as amateur. But this time it would be different. I spent days refining my version, incorporating bolder flavors, deeper reductions, and a smoother, silkier sauce. I braised the chicken until it melted off the bone, layered the dish with slow-cooked shallots and a whisper of smoked paprika to enhance the depth. It was no longer just a meal, it was a declaration. On presentation day, I placed my dish in front of Chef Moreau, my heart hammering against my ribs. He took a bite, closed his eyes briefly, then nodded once. Your best work. Yet, he said. Rich, complex, a dish with something to prove. Something inside me shifted at his words. Maybe I had been trying to prove something, not just to David but to myself, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally won. Graduation from August Culinary Institute came faster than I had anticipated. The grueling months of training, the endless repetition of techniques, and the relentless pursuit of perfection had all led to this moment. I had come here uncertain, hesitant. Now I stood with my classmates clad in my crisp chef's whites, my name embroidered over my heart, a symbol of everything I had fought for. As I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, I caught sight of Leah in the audience, her face beaming with pride. Beside her, David sat with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. He had agreed to come, but I knew this was more out of obligation than genuine excitement for my achievements. After the ceremony, he approached me. Congratulations, he said stiffly. I guess this is really happening. I exhaled, bracing myself. Yeah, it is. So what's next? You move back home? Start looking for a job? The way he said home made my stomach turn. Actually, I hesitated, then squared my shoulders. I've been offered a position at L'Ardoise in Paris. It's a 6-month apprenticeship, but it's an incredible opportunity. David's expression darkened. Paris? Are you serious? Completely. His jaw tightened. Maya, we've been trying to work through this. No, you've been waiting for me to give this up and come back. I corrected him. But that's not going to happen. This is what I want. This is who I am. He shook his head, exhaling sharply. So that's it? You're choosing this over our marriage? I swallowed hard. I'm choosing myself. For the first time, David had no response. He simply stared at me, realization sinking in. Maybe he had always assumed I would eventually wake up from this dream and return to the life we had built together. But that life wasn't mine anymore. A week later, I boarded a plane to Paris. L'Ardoise was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The kitchen was a battlefield of precision and artistry, where every plate was expected to reach near perfection before leaving the pass. The head chef, a towering force of nature named Chef Besson, was both my greatest critic and my most ruthless teacher. Confidence, Maya, he barked at me on my 3rd day, as I hesitated over a beurre blanc. The food knows when you doubt yourself, and it will betray you. Learn to trust my instincts. I learned to move without second-guessing, to let my hands work with a certainty I hadn't known I was capable of. One evening, after a particularly grueling dinner service, Chef Besson pulled me aside. You work like someone with something to prove, he observed. But you don't need to prove anything anymore, just cook. His words lingered with me. Months passed in a blur of 12-hour shifts, burnt fingertips, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I was exactly where I was meant to be. Then one night, everything changed. A well-known food critic dined at L'Ardoise, a man whose reviews could make or break a chef's career. That evening, I had been assigned to prepare the main course, my own interpretation of coq au vin. the dish that had defined my journey from the very beginning. I cooked with everything I had. Every lesson, every failure, every ounce of love I had ever poured into food was in that dish. 2 days later, the review was published. The standout of the evening was an exquisitely prepared coq au vin, a dish so rich in depth and soul that it spoke of a chef with a story to tell. If this is the kind of food we can expect, then mark my words, we will be seeing Maya Harrison's name on many Michelin-starred menus in the near future. I stared at the words, my hands shaking. For years I had been dismissed, overlooked, underestimated. Now the world was finally starting to see me, and I had never felt more alive.